Do you think it's easy for me to talk about this? Well then, fuck off. Sorry for the outburst, but I'm still trying to deal with the hurt and anger that persists even after all this time. My life was wonderful until I found out that my wife was a gift. I don't think I could even live with the fact that she was a gift, but I still can't understand why Shauna was so proud and happy that she was a gift. She considered it a blessing and did not see it as a curse. Shona Mackey and I first met many years ago while working for a national telecommunications company in Inverness. She was a dispatcher, and I was a telephone engineer. I fell in love with her soft Highland accent before I even saw her. Of course, it also helped that she turned out to be a red-haired beauty with a cheeky smile, a sparkle in her eyes, and a scattering of cute freckles. She told me that she liked me primarily because my name is Rob Roy McGregor, after the famous Scottish robber of the late 17th century. Perhaps she enjoyed taming the robber. My work took place throughout the Scottish Highlands, and I was responsible for installing and maintaining masts and receivers for faster broadband access. My boss joked that I was making life safer for sheep by bringing an online portal to farmers. But that wasn't why I liked the job. It wasn't so much what I did that motivated me, but where I did it that made me love my job. The Scottish Highlands are my workplace and combine stunning scenery, clean air, and soft light that makes the heart sing. After the birth of our son Robbie, it didn't take long for Shauna to convince me to move back to her home village of Lochmandy. Looking back, I shouldn't have agreed to the move, and not at all because of the location. The location was lovely, and Shona's mother and sister lived nearby, so we never had a shortage of someone to babysit baby Robbie for a day, evening, or weekend. Unfortunately, I didn't expect Shona to become fully involved in a very tight-knit matriarchal community where the women make the big decisions and the men seem to spend most of their free time in the village pub, sipping whiskey and beer and discussing the weather or the price of sheep. When the sun is shining, you might think that this is a paradise. White-walled cottages dot the lower slopes of the hills, and the village of Lochmandy is a cluster of modest houses, shops, and small cottages around the village square where the road ends at the head of the lake. On three sides, the village and its surrounding farms are protected by the so-called Magandi, a necklace of high hills around three sides of the Magandi Valley, providing protection from extreme weather conditions. It is a beautiful place, but when the sky becomes cloudy and the hilltops are not visible, it becomes gloomy and depressing. In such dark days, it is easy to believe the story that the Loch, a mountain lake, is haunted by the restless spirit of Morag McDarrell, a young woman who was raped and drowned one summer evening back in 1744. The details of what really happened will never be known for sure, but it is a story that has been passed down through generations, and it is the legacy of Morag McDarrell. That is to be the cause of my sadness. By all accounts, Morag was a spirited young woman of extraordinary beauty. She lived in an era when life was very tough and cruel. No one knows exactly how old she was when she met her fate. But the story goes that it all came down to her flirting with local young men. Although she naively believed that a little flirting would help her find a husband, some of the young men were outraged that she was teasing them. On that fateful summer evening, 4 young men ambushed her as she returned home from the fields to her parents. They stuffed a rag into her mouth to muffle her cries for help and dragged her into the deep thickets of purple heather on the bank of the loch. They may have thought that she would offer no resistance, but she must have fought like a wild cat to save her honor. The 4 suspects were later identified by scratches on their arms and faces. Poor Morag took one hell of a beating. Her arms and face were covered in bruises as they took turns raping her. Finally, when they were done with her and she passed out, they threw her into the loch and held her underwater. She was found later that night when a search party led by her father spotted her naked and lifeless corpse floating face down in the shallow waters off the lake's shore. At first, it was assumed that she drowned while swimming in the lake on the way home. But the truth soon became clear. The young people said that Morag wanted to have sex with them, after which they left her alone to wash herself in the bath. They insisted they had no idea how she drowned or why she had bruises on her face and arms. The loss of 4 young men from the available workforce in a small mountain village would create serious problems for the community. Donald McDarrell, the chief of the clan, did not want this to happen. As judge and jury, he decided the case in the young men's favor, ruling that the charge of forcible sexual assault had no merit. After Morag's death, none of the young people were punished. Instead, the boys could continue to work the land as usual, and the local women could only grumble and grumble among themselves about old Donald's failure to punish the culprits. During the following winter, there was much talk in the community about what the consequences of such a gross miscarriage of justice might be. Residents of mountainous regions listen to the surrounding nature and are often very superstitious. Most locals supported the idea that Morag's spirit would not rest in peace, that the loch was now haunted, and that those responsible would be damned by fate. Donald McDarrell, a chief who failed in his duties to administer justice, soon met a sad end. He and his McDarrell brethren, including the Morag murderers, joined Prince Charlie's Bonnie Army in 1745. At the Battle of Culloden on April 16, 1746, they were among the Highlanders advancing on the redcoats of Prince William, Duke of Cumberland. Donald and the young men who raped and killed Morag died a terrible death. Shot or bayoneted, they were systematically exterminated like animals by Butcher Cumberland soldiers as they lay wounded and screaming in agony after the battle. The women of the valley were heartbroken. In addition to losing most of their men, there was the possibility that their fragile economy would collapse, and they would either starve or be forced to leave the valley, begging and prostituting themselves in the towns in the lowlands to survive. The fact that they overcame all difficulties and saved their community testifies, on the one hand, to their strong will and determination to survive. On the other hand, this indicates their willingness to take desperate measures. In the absence of adult men, the widow of old McDarrell became the leader of the clan. She and several women traveled to Inverness and successfully petitioned for a meeting with Butcher Cumberland and General George Wade. No one knows exactly what happened at this meeting, but soon after, Dorlina Magandy's future was secured when General Wade made the site a staging post and supply depot for the British Army. There was only one road leading here, making it easily defensible, so that alone was a good enough reason for Wade's decision. However, it appears that the women living in this clearing also gave their word to General Wade that the soldiers temporarily stationed with them would be received with great cordiality. And indeed they were. So much so that at the end of the 18th century, the name of the towering Lochmandy mountain range became synonymous with good sekali, a slang expression for wild and possibly illicit sex. It meant getting some Magandy. Many Highlanders considered the actions of the Magandy Valley women shameful, but others saw them as a positive and practical strategy with no real alternative. Soldiers came and went, and the seeds of community restoration were sown. Literally. Unlike other depopulated areas of the Highlands, Magandy Valley flourished. The women enjoyed peace and quiet and earned enough to support themselves and their families by producing fine hand-woven woolen clothing that quickly became in demand in Edinburgh and London. A new generation of children, including many bastards of mixed redskin and McDarrell blood, grew up in a matriarchal society where the burden of leadership was passed from eldest daughter to eldest daughter. Mindful of Morag McDarrell's fate, the women of the valley have also taken steps they believe will eliminate the risk of any such sexual aggression in the future. We lived in Lochmandy for about 5 years, and were approaching our 7th wedding anniversary when my life took a turn for the worse. That year, I was happy as a hog in the mud as spring gradually turned into summer. Every time I returned home after days on the road, Shauna was like a bitch in heat. It's not that she was wildly sexy or had me half to death. Everything is much more loving. She kissed me more often, and at every opportunity, she ran her hands through my hair, touched my arm, stroked me with her hands, or rubbed against me. More often than not, her expressions of affection resulted in us making love. She didn't just want a quickie, but she wanted me to take the time to do all the touching, groping, and exploring to make her feel loved, wanted, and comforted. It reminded me of how she was when we first started dating, and I liked that she was trying to be more romantic. That Friday was pretty typical. Little Robbie was at a sleepover at Aunt Maggie and Uncle Duncan's house, visiting his cousin, another copper-haired 6-year-old named Malcolm. We nicknamed these two Ginger Nuts. Returning home from a week of maintenance inspections up north, I stopped by to say hello to Robbie and thank Maggie and Duncan for letting Shauna and I have the night to ourselves. Robbie quickly hugged me, but I played second fiddle. He was more interested in running with Malcolm. I remember thinking that they would probably be best friends forever. When I got home, the delicious aroma of beef stew with wild mountain thyme wafted from the kitchen. Shauna bustled around, setting the dining room table. She added a couple of tall candles, which was usually a sign that she wanted romance, and there was an open bottle of Côtes du Rhône on the table. She brought me a cold beer while I hung up my coat and put my dirty laundry in the laundry basket. After a week of working outside the home, it always takes me about half an hour to relax and get into the mood at home. Shauna was already used to this and didn't expect me to start any meaningful conversation right away. Instead, she filled the silence by talking about her day or week and the latest gossip. I relaxed with my beer while she pottered around the kitchen, stirring stews and putting plates in the top oven to warm up, chatting about the feast the next evening. The celebration was to mark the 18th birthday of Callum McDarrell, whose mother was the chief. The celebration will feature a top-notch fiddle band and Scottish country dancing. People were going to come from all over the area, and the village hall would be filled with people of all ages, from toddlers to frail pensioners. Shona became good friends with Fiona, the female chief, and helped Fiona and Dougal, her husband, organize the party. In recent weeks, Shauna seemed to be there every time I called her while I was away from home. She was incredibly excited about the preparations for Callum's birthday party and told me more than once how honored she was to be chosen as an assistant. Over dinner, she talked about how wonderful the day would be and how amazing it was that Callum had grown up so quickly and would be 18 tomorrow. She gave him a gold ring engraved with the intertwined initials KSH, which she showed me that evening after dinner, as we sat in the living room enjoying whiskey from nearby Glenfarclas. "So why isn't CM Callum McDarrell here?" I asked. Exactly. Well, his middle name is Shaw," she answered quickly, closing the small red velvet box and setting it on the coffee table. I didn't think much of it at that moment, because she gave me one of her special looks. Her twinkling eyes and mischievous grin said she was ready for bed. Cottages in the Highlands are usually single story, and ours was no exception. So we have no stairs to climb, and it wasn't long before we found ourselves between the sheets on our king-sized bed. I hugged her and kissed her tenderly, and then she climbed over me, threw back the sheet, and began to rub her erect private part against the lower part of my rapidly hardening manhood. "Ah, yes," she muttered, looking me straight in the eyes. "I just love being on top." We set off at a gallop, and there was no doubt about who was riding who. I tried to keep up, but soon she was bouncing up and down like a cowgirl riding a bronco, screaming and yelling about how she needed to be fucked harder. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, she stopped bouncing on me. She climaxed, shuddering and moaning, and I followed her. Still sitting on top of me, she fell onto my chest. She whispered. "Thank you, Rob. It was truly something. I love you so much." "I love you too," I whispered back, pulling the sheet over us. With Robbie gone for the night, I thought Saturday morning would give us time for some slow lovemaking. But Shauna rose before dawn, leaving me to doze while she showered and got dressed. "Good morning, lazy fellow," she said as I sat up in bed and watched her preening in the mirror. "I'm just going to see Fiona, but on the way back I'll stop by the bakery and buy us some buns for breakfast. You can still lie around, and after breakfast we'll pick up Robbie." I thought about lying in bed after she left, but decided to get up and do housework. After a quick shower, I changed into jeans and my favorite green and black plaid shirt, loaded the washing machine, and headed out to tidy up the living room before moving on to the rest of my chores. The small red box with the ring still lay on the coffee table. Nearby lay an envelope addressed to Callum McDarrell, which undoubtedly contained a greeting card. Looks like Shauna forgot to take them with her. We probably could have given them to Callum that evening, but I thought it would be easier to take them with us straight away. The chief's cottage stood alone in the middle of the land legally owned by the chief and was relatively isolated. But it was less than a mile away via a shortcut across the fields, and I thought the fresh air would blow away the cobwebs left by the Balvenie beer. While walking through fields with long, lush meadow grass, which sheep are very fond of, a village on the shore of a lake was visible in the distance. I had to climb over a couple of dry stone walls, but it only took me 20 minutes to reach the stone barn adjacent to the cottage. To get to the front door of the cottage, I had to go around the back of the barn and along the north side of the cottage. The chief's cottage is an old single-story Highland-style house, long and low, with thick, whitewashed walls and a black slate roof, originally thatched. When it was built over 200 years ago, it was important to minimize heat loss, so the windows are quite small, especially on the north and west sides of the cottage, facing the prevailing winds and bad weather. However, walking along the north side of the cottage, the window I passed was large enough for me to catch a glimpse of my wife, which made me stop in my tracks. It was clearly a bedroom, and she was on the king-sized bed, completely naked, bouncing up and down cowgirl style on someone else, just like she'd had sex with me the night before. She didn't see me because I was looking at her from the left, and her long red mane was whipping around as her head jerked up and down as she rode her partner. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. It seemed as if the world had stopped. The couple in the bedroom switched positions, and the man stood behind her. At first, I didn't understand who it was, since his back was to me, but then I saw that it was Callum McDarrell. He was grinning from ear to ear at Shauna. I stood there, numb with shock. I watched in horror as they reached the finish line and collapsed on the bed. I backed away from the window and leaned my back against the outer wall of the cottage, barely breathing. I realized that I must have stopped breathing normally while the terrible sight unfolded in front of me. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, but now I feel physically ill. My mind screamed in protest at the information I had just received, and my body tensed in an attempt to clear itself. I lowered my head between my legs and took a deep breath, trying to regain control of myself. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a couple of minutes. I was stunned. But as a maintenance engineer, I was trained to solve complex problems. Sharp reactions are not my style. I had no idea why Shauna was having sex with Callum, but if I struck immediately, others might get hurt. My main concern was baby Robbie, and I needed to know more about what was going on before taking any drastic action. I trudged toward the house, keeping the barn and a small clump of pine trees between the chief's cottage and myself, so as not to be noticed, although this was unlikely. Thoughts were confused. It seemed obvious that Shauna had planned everything. She was unlucky that I decided to refuse the opportunity to lie in bed and instead decided to deliver the card and gift she had forgotten. Most likely she forgot to bring a card and a ring simply because she was preoccupied with going there and letting Callum fuck her thoroughly. It looked like hot and intense sex. Perhaps it was his first time and she had just taken his virginity. Or has he had it for a long time? I didn't know this. They were in his bedroom at his parents' house. Do his parents know that my wife is having violent sex with their son? It was an important day in their son's life, so I couldn't imagine that they weren't home that morning. They should have known what was going on, unless they were blind and deaf. I was shocked, confused, and angry. I knew I couldn't deal with Shauna right away and needed to gather my thoughts. When I got back to my house, I put the card and gift for Callum back on the coffee table. I left a note in the kitchen for Shauna saying that I had decided to take advantage of the dry weather and go for a walk in Lochmandy. She knew that I liked to do this fairly regularly and that my standard procedure was to pack a lunch to walk 12 miles in a horseshoe pattern around the 3 highest peaks in about 6 hours. Over the next few hours, I put all my energy into walking through the hills, and the magnificent views from the tops of the hills allowed me to calm down a little and begin to recover from the shock of my wife's infidelity. Returning home late in the evening, I still didn't know what I was going to do. There seemed to be no point in crying over spilled milk, But the nature of my relationship with my wife would have to be reconsidered, and I might have to make some difficult decisions. One thing was clear for sure. I wasn't about to upset the apple cart by doing any sort of showdown before the evening's festivities, because gossip spreads like wildfire in mountain communities. Everyone does their part, comparing notes and spreading guesses, rumors, and lies. In no way did I want society to be involved in our personal lives. The holiday is a high-risk event, and gossipers might feast on random scraps of information, such as a missing husband, an upset wife, or a beaten birthday boy. The walk in the hills cleared my mind, but when I returned after lunch, I was still finding it difficult to meet Shauna. Luckily, Robbie was a useful distraction as he sat next to me on the couch, talking about what he had been doing with his cousin. The highlight was meeting the snails his cousin Malcolm found in the garden. For a 6-year-old, Robbie was quite knowledgeable about the natural world, and we had an interesting discussion about the difference between snails and slugs. Robbie believes that snails are smart because they have grown hard shells to prevent themselves from getting hurt. Shona cooked Aberdeen Angus burgers, and we sat down to eat around 6 o'clock, which was as late as Robbie could stand. The conversation was about a holiday that would start quite early to take into account the young participants. Robbie and I will put on our red McGregor kilts, and when it all starts, all 3 of us will be there around 7 in the evening. Robbie knew that, at the beginning of the evening, there would be a clown performing magic tricks to entertain the children, while the adults drank and chatted. We didn't talk about how long we would stay because everything depended on Robbie's well-being. Scottish country dancing is a wonderful invention that ensures that everyone has the opportunity to dance and interact with a wide range of different people. In other countries around the world, similar or comparable social dance formats exist, such as round dances, polkas, or line dancing. In a small place like Lochmandy, almost everyone dances along with everyone else, and this evening was no exception. The dance party began with the children trying out lighter dances, mostly with the help of their parents and grandparents. Robbie's favorite was the Dashing White Sergeant, which he learned at school. Together, we formed a family troika, energetically dancing around the hall, forming a group of 6 people in each circle, with the next troika approaching us. Dancing with Robbie, we must have looked like we were doing well, but I found it difficult to maintain the facade of a happy family. Despite what she had been doing that morning, Shauna showed no signs of worry or anxiety. She beamed with a smile and gladly accepted compliments on our talented son and how well the 3 of us danced. I kept checking to see if she could find an excuse to go and talk to Callum McDarrell, but other than wishing him a happy birthday and giving him a card and a gift when we first arrived, she studiously ignored him. Neither I nor anyone else could suspect that anything was going on between them, and I began to wonder if this was just a one-time occurrence. As expected, Robbie began to tire as the evening wore on. Shona looked after him most of the time while he played with a few of his little friends, including Malcolm. I thought she was expecting me to take Robbie home so she could have a chance to flirt and dance with Callum, but I was surprised to learn that she had arranged a sleepover for Robbie and Malcolm at our house. Around 9:30 p.m., Shauna and Maggie took both babies to our house. About half an hour later, Maggie returned to us. She said that she and Shauna would take turns, and each of them would babysit the boys for an hour, while the other had fun at the party. This meant that Shauna would be back in about an hour, when Maggie relieved her of babysitting duties. I danced with Maggie and some other women and tried my best to act normal, whatever that meant. The music made conversation difficult, but I was fine with it, and ended up standing at the edge of the crowd, sipping a beer and listening to a group of fiddlers playing various reels, struts, and jigs. Although I usually looked in the direction of the group, I also kept an eye out for any signs that someone knew that my wife was being watched behind my back. True, I could not be sure of this. A couple of times I thought some women might know something. 1 or 2 looked my way, but I decided they were just testing me. Callum McDarrell has done his fair share of dances, grandmothers, aunties, and friends of. His mother took turns dancing with the birthday boy. The men took turns buying him beer whenever the woman let him rest. No doubt he was well-mannered and popular, and under other circumstances I would have bought him a drink in turn. But now, there was no such opportunity. While waiting for the beer I ordered at the bar, I happened to be next to Callum's father, Dougal. I didn't know if he knew about Callum and Shona, but here was an opportunity to solve a small part of the mystery. "You must be proud of your son, Dougal," I said, smiling. "Yes, I guess so," he replied. "Tell me, is Callum named after his grandfather or someone else in the family?" I asked. "Yes, Callum is his maternal grandfather. Then his middle name will be Dougal, after you?" "No, Hector, after his paternal grandfather," said Dougal. "How interesting," I replied. "Are these good gentlemen with us this evening?" "Maybe take a shower," he answered. "Both live far from here. Callum's grandfather emigrated to Canada many years ago, and Hector's grandfather lives with my sister and her family in Australia. It's a shame they missed out on a good dance party, but it can't be helped," I said, ending our short conversation and paying for the beer. Dougal unwittingly provided me with evidence that Shona and Callum's morning meeting was unlikely to be spontaneous, impromptu. Sure, the C on the gold ring stands for Callum, but it's safe to say the W stands for Sean. In my opinion, the intertwined letters could mean cuckolding whore. My mood did not improve when my wife reappeared a little after 11 o'clock. She looked around the room and gave me a quick wave before heading straight to Callum McDarrell. Is this really the moment they've been waiting for all evening? At first glance, all she was doing was taking her turn to dance with the birthday boy, but it seemed to me that the wide smiles of anticipation on their faces could not be mistaken. He immediately accepted her invitation without hesitation, and soon they were spinning around the dance floor in each other's arms. If I had not been attentive to these telltale signs on the faces of others, I might not have noticed anything, but the spectators, knowing that something was happening, could not help themselves. While watching the dancing couple, many women, including my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, stole glances in my direction. They were undoubtedly amused by the thought of my wife dancing with her young lover and me not knowing anything. I put on a poker face and decided to go outside, only when Shauna and Callum were still on the dance floor after 2 dances. Someone must have suspected that I knew what was going on. As I stood outside in the dark, trying to recover from the thought that half of Lochmandy seemed to know that I had become a cuckold, Dougal came up behind me. "You don't look happy, Rob. What's the matter?" "Your son and my wife," I answered. "So you found out everything. Fiona thought you might have figured it out. Please don't make a scandal today. Fiona would like to be able to talk to you tomorrow morning about what's going on. Tell Shauna you have a little headache, and then come see us when she takes little Robbie to church. It is very important that you hear what Fiona has to say. Can I tell her that you will be with her?" He looked at me with concern as I thought about what to answer. "To be honest, I don't think it will do much good, Dougal, but I suppose I can wait until then. I'm not going to cause a scandal, as you put it. Just keep your son away from my wife. I have no idea how many people know about them, but it would be better if they didn't spend the rest of the evening hugging each other on the dance floor. This just rubs salt in my wounds, and I'm not sure I have the patience to bear it." "Thank you, Rob. I'll ask Fiona to talk to Callum calmly." I waited 5 minutes before returning to the club. Shauna was now dancing with her brother-in-law, Duncan. Callum was dancing with his older sister, Heather, a 22-year-old black-haired beauty who was next in line to become chieftain and was studying accounting and finance at the University of Inverness. When the dance ended, Shauna came up to me and gave me a big hug and kiss. She was still radiating happiness, and clearly had no idea that I knew about her affair with Callum. We ended the evening by dancing together and then walking hand in hand up the hill to our cottage. I tried to act like everything was normal, and it helped that Shauna kept talking about how great the party was and who was there, and how they all said they really enjoyed it and the band was amazing and so on. I bit my tongue and simply interspersed her conversation with random remarks like yes or exactly. Maggie was happy to see us and agreed that Shauna and I would take both boys to church in the morning and Malcolm would meet his mom and dad there. Shauna checked to make sure the boys were okay, then went straight to bed, apparently falling asleep before I even finished my business in the bathroom. For some time I lay awake, thinking about what the head of the clan could tell me that could change the course of my thoughts. I was quite sure that my marriage was mortally wounded, and I believed that Lady Fiona was unlikely to be able to resuscitate it. There's no way to go back having sex with someone, and I really doubted that what Fiona had to tell me would save my marriage. The next morning, Shauna made breakfast and took the boys to church herself when I said I had a headache and needed some fresh air. As the devout inhabitants of Lochmandy entered the village church that Saturday morning, I was retracing the path to heartbreak I had trodden 24 hours earlier. Soon I was at the chief's cottage. When he knocked on the door, Fiona answered. "Thank you for coming, Rob," she said, leading me into the living room. "The rest are in the church, so we won't be disturbed. I've boiled the kettle, and we'll make us a cup of tea if you don't prefer whiskey." I wouldn't bother about a cup of tea, but it would be extremely rude to refuse, and I expected our conversation, even without getting off to a bad start, to be quite difficult. Fiona brought tea, and we sat opposite each other in two wingback chairs by the fireplace. I didn't know what Fiona wanted to tell me, so I waited for her to speak. "Let me start by saying I'm sorry you found out about Sean and Callum," she said. There was a hint of concern in her voice as she continued. "Can I ask how this happened? Did someone tell you?" I tried to control myself, especially in front of little Robbie and Malcolm. But to Fiona, my anger must have been obvious. "It doesn't matter how I found out, Fiona. No one told me, although many people seem to know, that your son raped my wife." "Rob, that's not all," she replied. "It's a long story, and I need you to listen to what I'm about to tell you. I will do my best to answer any questions you may have. The only thing I would like to ask is that you promise to listen to me before making any decisions. You can do it? Okay, Fiona. You can speak out, but I don't think it will change anything." "Thank you, Rob. I won't deny that Shauna and Callum had a close relationship. What you don't know is that Shauna is a gift. I don't mean that she is talented or endowed with some gift from God. I'm talking about the gift a woman gives to a young man when he comes of age." "Wait a minute, Fiona," I interrupted in amazement. "Are you saying that Shauna and Callum had sex because it's some kind of tradition or rite of passage when he turns 18? "Yes, Rob, that's about it," she replied. "You see, the tradition of women giving themselves as gifts in the Morag Valley began after the rape of Morag McDarrell. Everyone knows the history of Morag, and everyone knows that after 1745, the women of the Morag Valley took over the administration of the valley. These women did everything they could to rebuild the community and ensure the prosperity of the valley. Yes, they hosted redcoats in their beds, but what most people don't know is that they also ensured that the young women of the valley would never again be at risk of being raped and murdered by chauvinistic young men with wild libidos. Let me get this straight, Fiona. Are you saying that it wasn't enough for the old sluts to just have sex with the soldiers? They decided to fuck the local youth too? Rob, you are deliberately distorting what I am trying to tell you. It wasn't like that at all. Women agreed to give each other to their sons when they turned 18 years old. A gift from an older woman to a younger man is a reward for his good behavior while growing up. The donated women were originally old maids or widows of men killed in wars. For many years, the men of the Morag Valley sought their destiny in North America, and there were always battles they could fight. They fought against the French, against the Native American Indians, against Santa Anna and her Mexicans, fought each other in the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War. In between, they joined the California Gold Rush, but there were almost no women with them. The 20th century brought even more terrible wars, which did not spare the men of the valley. The Boer War in South Africa was followed by the First World War, the Spanish Civil War, the Second World War, and the Korean War in the 50s. For more than 2 centuries, there was no shortage of unmarried women to give of themselves. So, if it is unmarried women who participate in this tradition, then how the hell did Shauna end up being given as a gift? I asked. All women in the valley are expected to honor tradition and be willing to be gifted. Today we are lucky that our men do not die in wars, but this means that there are few widows and single women in our community. Instead, gifted women are those whose husbands are often absent from home. These men may work on oil rigs in the North Sea for weeks at a time, or simply be in Glasgow or Edinburgh from Monday to Friday. The main thing is that the gifted woman is able to make herself available without disturbing family life. I think this whole thing is just an excuse for older women to enjoy illicit affairs with young guys, I told her. Not at all, she replied. Fiona, are you speaking from your own experience? Have you ever been gifted? I asked. I don't have to answer this question, but to calm you down, Rob, I'll tell you. The answer is yes, but that was many years ago, and I won't tell you more. The gifted woman and her boyfriend should behave responsibly and keep their relationship as private as possible. Shona and Callum perhaps should have shown a little more restraint last night. So what you're saying is that Shauna said she was ready, willing, and able to have sex with Callum, but that they should have been a little more careful? Rob, it's not just about sex. Giving is done with care and tenderness. The courtship period lasts 3 months until the young man's 18th birthday. During this period, the couple meets as often as possible and gets to know each other, spending time together, talking about everything that's important in life, and about the young man's plans for the future. There is no sexual intercourse during the courtship period, although the couple may hold hands and kissing is permitted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's no wonder my wife has been such a frequent visitor to Fiona's cottage over the past few months. She was dating Callum. But this is even worse, I said. You say that this is a full-fledged romance and not just quick sex. The only salvation could be that it was some kind of spontaneous, unforeseen event, some kind of one-time mistake. Fiona paused briefly, as if contemplating what to say next. I know it's probably hard for you to understand what's going on, Rob, but the relationship between Shona and Callum is not an affair, and it doesn't pose a real threat to your marriage. Callum needs to learn about women and relationships, and Shona is a wonderful woman who has taken it upon herself to help him do that. Of course, we all hoped that you would not find out that Shona is a gift, but you must understand that giving yourself as a woman is a long tradition in our society. She enjoys widespread support, and women who give are highly respected. Perhaps so, I replied. But who does it? Who is the matchmaker? Who decides which woman should be gifted? A young man can give preference to one woman or another, but the final decision is made by the clan leader, she said, looking me straight in the eyes. This is always a carefully considered decision, and neither the woman nor the young man is forced into a relationship. Let me guess, I answered, trying to control myself. Callum told you that he wanted to fuck my wife, you asked her, and she agreed? That's very rude wording, Rob, she objected. To put it very bluntly, that's how it was, but I can't think of a better woman than Shona to teach Callum about love, respect, and responsibility in the adult world. I don't agree, I said. All he learned was lust, disrespect, and thoughtlessness. Lust for my wife, disrespect for me, and damn the consequences. What about the risk of pregnancy? It seems like a high price to pay for a few moments of pleasure. It's up to the gifted couple to take precautions or not. Strictly speaking, this is part of the tradition according to which a woman gives herself unconditionally. Many of the Valley's children owe their existence to the gifts of their mothers, often in circumstances where women would not otherwise be blessed with offspring. For hundreds of years, these children helped populate this part of the mountain country. After the First and Second World Wars, for example, gift-giving gave some women children they would not otherwise have had because their husbands had died in those wars. So, Fiona, besides the occasional unlucky, illegitimate child, there must be other consequences for women given to young men. Not really. There were only 1 or 2 small problems, but overall the experience was very positive. Sometimes we intervene if it looks like there might be a problem. The last time this happened was when John and Mary MacDonald moved to Glasgow, shortly after you moved here. That's why they left. She was clearly very upset that she was leaving, and he couldn't wait to leave. Yes, I'm afraid she became too emotionally involved with the young man to whom she gave herself. She wanted to extend the relationship beyond a year. So, are you saying that she got more than just one time in the hayloft? Perhaps you don't quite understand, Rob. You see, giving is not just a one-time reward for good behavior during adolescence. This is an incentive to stay in the valley longer. Young men often don't know what they want to do with their lives. The endowment is fixed for 1 year or until the young man leaves the valley, whichever comes first. I was stunned. Are you seriously saying that Callum expects to have sex with Shona within the next 12 months? Please try to understand, Rob. Giving has eliminated unwanted sexual aggression from young men because giving women helps them become mature, confident, and well-mannered. Of course, there is physical intimacy, but during this time the young man will learn about women and relationships, and will then be emotionally better prepared to face the world. It may seem nice to you, Fiona, but do you really think I'm just going to stand by and let Callum continue to have sex with Shona? The cancer on the mountain will soon whistle before I let this happen. Look, Rob, I know you're upset, but try to understand that this is part of Shauna's legacy. As a woman from Morag Valley, she has no choice, and it won't last long. By all means, talk to her about it, but I would advise you not to take a hard line. An ultimatum is rarely a good negotiation strategy. Our conversation seemed to have come to an end, and I stood up. I have to go, Fiona. I listened to everything you had to say and tried to understand, but as far as I understand, little has changed. If anything has changed, it's for the worse, but thanks anyway for the tea and conversation. Fiona walked me to the front door. Don't do anything rash, Rob, and remember that you can always come and talk to me. I wondered if Fiona would alert Shauna that I knew what was going on. I would have preferred the advantage of complete surprise, but only because I wanted to get an unprepared and unvarnished reaction from Shauna. When Robbie and Shauna returned from church, I couldn't tell if she knew I was watching her, but she seemed a little depressed. Bacon rolls for Sunday lunch in the kitchen were one of Robbie's favorite dishes, and we had fun making sure his enthusiasm didn't lead to any major leaks. Although he was young enough to help himself, he had not yet quite mastered portion control, especially with tomato ketchup. After lunch, I settled Robbie in the living room, and he happily played with his toy car collection, then returned to the kitchen to join Shauna. She watched me carefully as I sat down at the kitchen table again, so she seemed to know what was in store for her. I didn't mean to beat around the bush. Looking straight at her, I said, "I know about you and Callum." She sighed. "I know you do," she replied. "Why did you do that, Shauna?" I asked. "Because I am a woman from the Morag Valley, Rob," she answered. "You can throw a woman out of the valley, but you cannot tear the valley out of a woman. It is my duty and my destiny to continue our legacy. We cannot simply throw away more than 2.5 centuries of tradition that has been passed down through generations of women and has protected the foundations of our society. But haven't you thought about what will happen to us?" Of course, I thought about it. I'm sorry you're upset, but you know I love you, just like I know you love me. You must understand that what I do does not threaten what you and I have. "I don't understand how you can say that," I replied. "I find it difficult to understand your reasoning, Shona. You have committed adultery, and our marriage is in grave danger. Please don't look at it that way, Rob. I hope we can work things out and you will see that our marriage is stronger than ever. I knew that you would find out what was going on, but I didn't think it would happen so soon. So perhaps I wasn't as well prepared for this conversation as I should have been. The thing is, I'm not having an affair with Callum because he's not in love with me and I'm not in love with him. Come to think of it, all I do is reward him for good behavior and teach him life skills. What happens will have no real impact on you and me." "How do you know?" I asked her. "Nothing will change. I will always be with you when you are here. I can take care of Callum when you're not home, and you won't see him when you get back. You don't see Callum much anyway. On weekends, he usually goes with friends to football in Inverness or to some music festival. This won't change. But you're asking me to share you with Callum. I don't think so, Rob. You will receive all the love and affection that I have always given you, but I am 32 years old and have a lot of reserves. I'm not taking anything away from you to give to Callum. What he gets will be just the extra I can give. I think we'll have to agree so as not to disagree. I know I don't own you, but you are my wife and I am your husband. I am not going to accept the fact that you can temporarily deviate from your marriage vows to be faithful and devoted to me. That's a very ungenerous attitude, Rob. I thought you might be able to look beyond the small details and understand the greater good we are trying to achieve. This is a great honor for me. I was chosen to make a man out of this boy. This is something special. And not only that, he is also the son of a chief. You make it sound like it's something between a ceremonial ritual and a transcendental experience, Shauna, but in reality it's just an affair with a young guy who decides he wants to have sex with you and have you on his arm. I don't think you're teaching him anything more than various sexual techniques. You may think so, Rob, but this is a very unusual arrangement. Many other women had walked this path before me, and their husbands usually supported them, realizing that it was a small sacrifice in exchange for peace and prosperity in the valley. And what happens if the husband objects? Most husbands understand that they can only turn a blind eye to it, so they don't mind. Very rarely does the husband object, and eventually leaves the valley. As you know, when it comes down to it, it's the women who control what happens in this valley. It sounds like an ultimatum to me, I said. Your friend Fiona warned me not to give you ultimatums, so I'm puzzled that you're willing to go down this path. I'm not forcing you to do anything, Rob. In fact, everyone would be better off if you didn't do anything, including you. This is all very new to you, and you probably need time and space to think it all over. I think we both need to think this through carefully, Shauna. I think I know what I need to do, but I'm willing to wait a few days if you agree to stay away from Callum. I didn't wait for her answer and walked into the living room to see if Robbie wanted to go for a walk. It was a regular Sunday afternoon affair, which meant Shauna had some time to herself, and Robbie got to spend time with me for a change. I couldn't help the fact that I wouldn't be home during the work week and appreciated those couple of hours each week. Robbie and I usually found ourselves on the shore of the lake and looked for the wading birds that like to feed in the reedy shallows. Robbie's favorite bird was the gray heron with its long legs, long beak, and gray, black, and white plumage. He was delighted when that day he saw a lone heron. She stood motionless, hunched over, bending her long neck and hiding her head on her chest, as if wanting to hide from the whole world. Shauna and I barely spoke to each other for the rest of the day. They both tried to keep up the conversation with Robbie, who was engrossed in Shauna's story about the heron and their plans for the coming week. I don't think he realized that the atmosphere that evening was tense. As far as I could tell, Shauna remained silent, trying to buy time and avoid escalating the crisis, in the hope that I would eventually come to terms with her position. I don't think she realized the extent of my anger, and that I controlled it only through a determined self-control that included refusing further discussion. There's not much I can do if Shauna decides to ignore my request to cool off with Callum. As I packed my suitcase that evening, I couldn't help but think about how I would feel if I had to leave home forever. What I felt was almost unbearable. It was as if the three of us were in a car accident and the wife I loved was suddenly taken from me. All I had left was my son. How can I avoid losing it? It took me time to understand what was happening and what I could do about it. The next morning I got up early, determined to hit the road before Shauna got up. I was just finishing my coffee and putting on my jacket when she appeared in a robe. Her eyes looked puffy and red, so she probably didn't sleep well. "Safe trip, Rob," she said as I headed for the door. "Please remember that I love you. Let's talk later this week." "Okay, Shauna," I replied. I'll be damned if I let her hear the L word from me. Looking back, I think I spent the first part of that week in numbness and shock. Didn't call home or hear from Shauna, but that wasn't unusual. I often visited remote areas where the telephone network was very poor, which is why we tried to modernize and improve the telecommunications infrastructure. That Thursday evening, like most Thursdays, I was booked into a serviced apartment the company was renting in Inverness. It was much more comfortable than a boring hotel room and had all the comforts of home, including a good selection of whiskey. I had just finished writing my reports in preparation for the weekly management meeting the next day when the doorbell rang around 7 p.m. I opened it and there stood Lady Fiona. She was bundled up against the evening chill in what I would call country house attire. A dark green Barber jacket, thick khakis, and sturdy brown leather knee-high boots. In the parking lot near the apartment there was a green Range Rover SUV, undoubtedly matching the color of the outfit. "Good evening, Rob. I'm sorry I dropped by without warning. Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course," I replied, opening the door and letting her into the living room. She took off her jacket, revealing a simple white blouse and beige cardigan, and sat down in a chair. I wasn't really surprised to see her, but I still had to ask, "You came all the way to Inverness just to see me, Fiona?" "More or less. I went out with my daughter this afternoon, but you are the main reason I'm here. I'd like to have a cup of tea if you don't mind, and then maybe we can talk about everything." I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Tea is not only about hospitality, it's also a very British way of dealing with troubles. Bad news meets a stiff upper lip in a boiling kettle. I had a bad feeling about Fiona's visit, but the process of making tea gave me the opportunity to reflect on why she came to see me. She was not naive and was dressed very conservatively. I was sure that this was not an attempt to seduce me, but it seemed that she had some plans, and I hoped that she did not bring bad news. When he returned to the living room and gave her a sip of tea, she did not waste time with conversational pleasantries. "I'll get straight to the point, Rob. I've talked to Shauna about the situation we're in, and I think we can resolve it to some extent. That's why I'm here. I'm not sure it'll be easy, Fiona, but thanks for coming. Looks like you have some good news. Does this mean you canceled Shauna's gift?" "Not exactly, Rob, but we've thought a lot about your position and tried to look at it from your point of view. Shauna and I agree that we misjudged your reaction, and now we need to see if there is any way we can make amends. I don't see how it's possible if Shauna continues to have sex with Callum. That was the problem we were facing, but then we realized we were only looking at one half of the equation. We thought about what you said and tried to look at it from your point of view. You discovered that Shauna was getting something and you were getting nothing or even losing something. Not exactly, Fiona, but I think you're starting to understand. Thank you, Rob. I hope you like the solution we came up with. So what is this solution, Fiona?" "Heather." "Heather?" "Yes, Rob. My daughter, Heather. She lives here and can look after your needs in Inverness while Shona looks after her brother in the Magandy Valley." I looked at her in amazement. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. She thinks you're a great guy and will be happy to help. I actually think she really likes the idea." I was stunned. Up until this point, I thought there was a glimmer of hope that Fiona would tell me that they had decided to rescind Shauna's gift. Instead, in an attempt to fix the situation, she hands me her own daughter. Fiona realized she had caught me off guard and waited to see if I would be interested, tilting her head slightly to one side and raising her eyebrow expectantly. Instantly, the clouding of my mind cleared, and the depression and sadness I had been experiencing for the past few days were replaced by ice-cold anger. In those brief moments of revelation, I knew that I had lost my wife and there was no way to save my marriage, but I also knew without a doubt that at some stage, I would settle scores with the traitors. I didn't know for sure how I would do it, but I wasn't going to let them know what I was thinking. "That's a damn good offer, Fiona," I told her. "If I understand you correctly, you're saying that no matter what happens, Shauna will be giving herself to Callum, but you're offering to balance the situation by offering me Heather?" She looked at me and nodded. "In the end, it is, Rob." "Okay, Fiona. I don't know what to say now. I need to think it over, and I'll talk to Shauna over the weekend. Let's see what we do next." "Okay, Rob. I think that's what we were hoping for." "Thank you for the tea," she said, getting to her feet. "Today I'm staying at Heather's apartment." She handed me a small piece of paper. "Here's her phone number," she said. "I'll tell you that you can contact her." Driving back to Magandy Valley on Friday evening, I was still wondering what to do. In the short term, I needed to check and confirm that Shauna would continue to have sex with Callum, no matter what I said or did. If my wife wants to have an intimate relationship with someone else, then I will not have an intimate relationship with her, although this possibility has probably not occurred to her. I also need to decide whether or not to accept Heather McDarrell as a consolation prize. Then I can decide what to do to protect myself in the medium to long term. When I got home, Shauna was on edge. I think she was grateful that Robbie monopolized me for an hour or so before going to bed. Meanwhile, she tried her best to repeat the wonderful evening we enjoyed exactly a week ago. She brought me a cold beer while Robbie chatted and then got busy in the kitchen making ragu bolognese. Once Robbie was put to bed, Shauna opened a bottle of Barbera d'Asti, and we sat down to eat. I had a rough idea of what we would talk about, but I left it to Shauna to start the conversation. Fiona said she spoke to you last night. What do you think about the solution we came up with? She asked. That's not what I want, I replied. Did you meet Callum while I was away this week? She turned away, avoiding my gaze. Sorry, Rob. I was chosen as a gift to him, so I can't just refuse him. So you're still going on like Fiona told me? She looked worried, but determined. Yes, she said quietly, nodding her head to confirm her intentions. I know you don't like it, Rob, but I have to do it. I decided to give her one last chance to change her mind. I hear what you're saying, but I still don't understand why you think you have to do this, Shauna. I'm not going to threaten you or give you an ultimatum, because you have to decide for yourself what to do. I can't make you stop what you're doing, but are you sure you can live with the consequences, whatever they are? Yes, Rob, I know it will be difficult, but I think I can do it. This isn't forever, and I won't hold it against you if you decide to balance things out. I think you're making a big mistake, Shauna, but it looks like you've already made up your mind. Is there really nothing I can say or do to change the situation? No, Rob. I don't think there's any chance of that, she replied. You see, I didn't tell you, but I myself am a child of giving. I wouldn't exist if it weren't for giving. My mother was a gift, and I am the result of that. My biological father was the young man to whom she gave herself. Giving created me. So it was almost inevitable that the circle of life would lead to me giving myself in turn. Wait a minute, Shauna. You said your father died in a car accident while your mother was pregnant with you. Now you want to tell me that he is not your real father? Yes, she replied. It's true that my mother's husband, my father, died when his car fell off a cliff. I don't know exactly what happened, but it turned out that he was well insured. So we did not suffer any financial losses. I don't think my mother will ever truly come to terms with his death. She told me about my biological father when I was a teenager, so I would know why my medical records were different from what I expected. It's a damn interesting story, Shauna, but I still don't understand why it makes you want to have an affair with a teenager. Rob, this is my destiny. Giving led to my existence, and my existence led to me becoming gifted. I realized there was nothing more I could say to change her mind, so I simply nodded, and we ate in silence for a while, each with our own thoughts. However, there was one more important question I needed to ask. From now on, I don't want Robbie to have any contact with Callum or his family. Can you promise me this? I asked. Of course, she answered quickly, smiling uncertainly. I don't know if she thought I accepted our changed circumstances, but it was just damage control on my part. I was going to do everything possible to ensure that my son did not encounter any strange behavior that could affect his young mind. It will already be difficult for him to cope with the changes in our family relationships that will happen. After dinner, I decided to treat myself to an 18-year-old Glenfarclas single malt, which I sipped while we sat and watched some mindless TV show. As a result, when we went to bed around midnight, it was as if a huge burden had been lifted from me, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I have no idea if Shauna slept as soundly, but I'm pretty sure my subconscious recognized that the die had been cast, and change was inevitable. On Sunday morning, I told Shauna that I would no longer go to church with her and Robbie. I wasn't going to play happy family with her and give people the impression that I was okay with being a cuckold. I think she understood the reason why I wouldn't go to church with her, but she wasn't entirely sure. Why don't you want to go to church? She asked. Have you lost faith in God? No, but I don't think he's there, I replied. I'll go for a walk in the hills instead. If God exists, he will find me. I didn't go for a walk in the hills that Sunday morning. Instead, he used the time that Shauna and Robbie were away to move his things into the guest bedroom. Shauna didn't find out what I had done until we went to bed that night. I made sure to go to bed first and was in bed with the lights off by the time Shauna appeared at the guest bedroom door. "What are you doing here, Rob?" she asked. "What does it look like, Shauna?" I answered. "I won't share your bed because you share it with Callum McDarrell." "Come on, Rob. Seriously?" "Damn seriously, Shauna. I'm not going to make a big deal out of this, but you'll have to deal with it. Otherwise, I'll move out. For Robbie's sake, I hope it doesn't come to that." She frowned and her lips pursed in anger. "Okay, Rob, let it be like that. I think you're acting rather stupidly, cutting off your nose without looking at your face. You know where to find me if you need me." The next week on the road, I decided that I would not have sex with Heather McDarrell as compensation for the temporary abduction of my wife by her brother. I will not agree with the absurd idea that this is how some strange equation of infidelity is solved. Never. I'll fuck Heather just for my own pleasure, as long as she's not forced to offer herself to me. You see, many years ago, I learned how to make the best of bad situations. My then-girlfriend didn't like me smoking. "It's like kissing an ashtray," she said. Then she said that I would have to choose between her and cigarettes. I accepted her point of view, so I decided to give up cigarettes. But it was not easy. The first 2 months were the most difficult. I was grumpy like a bear with a sore head. Then she decided that she was no longer interested in me, and we broke up. How did I make the best of this bad situation? You guessed it. I no longer smoke, and, as a result, I am slimmer and healthier. Shauna's affair with Callum is another bad situation. No matter what I do, it won't save my marriage. So, how can I take advantage of this bad situation? Well, screwing Heather McDarrell would be a good start, so I called her on Wednesday, and we agreed to meet for dinner in Inverness on Thursday. I guess I could just ask her to come to my apartment, but that's not my style. I wanted to enjoy her company. Besides, I needed to have a serious conversation with her if we were going to meet on a regular basis. At dinner, we got to know each other much better. Besides the fact that she is a very beautiful girl, she is also smart and a good conversationalist. Her last year of university began in September, and her studies took up a lot of time. At the same time, she worked in the summer for a well-known firm of chartered accountants in Inverness. She has a steady boyfriend named Donnie, who studied agriculture at UHI, the University of the Highlands and Islands. During the summer holidays, he worked on a farm, and they only saw each other at weekends, so that when I was in Inverness, during the week, she could be my friend with benefits. When she told me about this, she had a wide grin on her face. I felt a little sorry for Donnie, but she said they weren't exclusive. I was willing to bet he thought differently. As it turned out, Heather's mother didn't force her, and I took her to my apartment that Thursday night. For most of 8 years, I had no one but Shauna, and I forgot the great pleasure of meeting a new sexual partner. Heather was much younger than me, so I thought it would be very difficult to maintain contact with her, and I was not sure that my state of mind would be a hindrance. I was wrong on both counts. It turned out that Heather is not particularly active sexually. She is not a virgin, but, according to her, she has little sexual experience. She jumped at the opportunity to have a short-term, no-strings-attached relationship with a reliable, experienced man, which is exactly how her mother described me. That first night, I showed her how great it was to take things slow, and build things up to a climax. I wanted her to completely relax in my company, so we sat on the couch for a while and kissed, touching and stroking each other, while fully clothed. When she was calm, relaxed, and ready to move on to the next stage, we went to bed. As I helped her undress, I kept saying how beautiful she was. Words did not fail me. There were many to describe her. Fresh, young, soft, gentle, stunning, amazing. She stood proudly naked, her firm and ripe young breasts in perfect balance, with the roundness of her narrow hips framing her well-trimmed black bush. Then it was her turn to help me undress, picking up the idea of talking about what she was doing as she went along. I was pleased that her efforts were rewarded with a healthy and happy response from my lower body, despite my recent state of mind. It was clear that she expected to follow my lead, so I took her hand and we went to bed. Under the blanket, I hugged her tenderly, and she snuggled close to me. We lay face to face on our sides and kissed lightly, caressing each other. I flipped her over onto her back and began my downward journey, kissing and nibbling on her hardening pink buds, and then began kissing her flat tummy while running my hands over her thighs and then her privates. The attention I gave her had the desired effect, and she began to moan. She later told me that no one had given her so much time for foreplay before, and she had no idea that it could significantly improve stimulation, enhance sensations, and lead to a more powerful climax. When I finally got to her sweet spot and caressed her, she squirmed and writhed, gasping and puffing, reaching a powerful climax, her hands clutching my hair. When she came down to the ground, I moved back onto the bed and hugged her. "My God," she finally said, her face breaking into a wide smile. "How did you do this? I thought I died and went to heaven." "It's not a big secret," I said, taking her hand and raising it to my hard manhood. "Let's see what else I can teach you." She learned quickly and understood what I was doing and obeyed my desires, and soon the two of us rushed to the finish line. After that, we hugged for a while, and she said she couldn't stay with me. She lived in the same apartment with two other young women and did not want to be talked about. This suited me quite well, and I called a taxi for her while she got dressed. I offered to take her myself, but she decided that that would also be immodest. We kissed goodbye, and she said that she really enjoyed being with me and that she was looking forward to next time. That Friday, I took time off from work to go and consult with an attorney so that I would be well prepared for what might happen as a result of the actions I planned to take. As summer gradually gave way to autumn, the situation became worse and better. My relationship with Shauna has changed. Although she was still giving herself to Callum McDarrell, I was not unfriendly towards her. I did all the same household chores as before, but did not show much affection to her when we were together, and avoided communicating with her family or friends. Instead, I focused on communicating with young Robbie, even if it was just the three of us. For example, if we were walking somewhere, I would happily hold hands with Robbie, but not with her. However, we still spent time together on weekends, taking Robbie on picnics in the hills or driving to the coast to buy fresh lobsters or crabs at the small fishing port. I'm sure Shauna understood why I pulled away from her, but she probably thought it was temporary. We seemed to have reached an unspoken agreement that we would not discuss anything related to her affair or the state of our marriage. I was fine with this, because I knew what I was going to do and didn't want to signal my intentions too early. Meanwhile, my love life with Heather McDarrell was getting more and more juicy. We met every Thursday when I had to stay late in Inverness. She came to the apartment and cooked dinner, and then stayed the night. She came up with a legend, telling her neighbors that every Thursday she visited her elderly aunt. Heather's sexual prowess has improved exponentially. She learned a lot and used it skillfully, bringing pleasure to both me and herself. I think Donnie also took advantage of her improved carnal knowledge and skills. As she said, it looked like he might be about to propose to her. He didn't know he was sharing her with me, but she wasn't wearing anyone's ring, so I was happy to continue having sex with her. Around mid-September, the shit hit the fan, or more accurately, the vomit hit the frying pan. One Sunday morning, while preparing breakfast, I heard the sound of someone vomiting in the toilet. After a while, a very pale Shauna appeared, clutching her robe with one hand and leaning against the doorway to the kitchen with the other. "Rob, could you do me a favor and make some weak tea?" she asked. "Without milk and sugar. I want to go and lie down." "Of course, Shauna," I replied. "No problem. By the way, what term are you in?" Her shoulders slumped, and she sighed. "I don't know," she said. "Let's talk later." She turned to leave, and I put the kettle on. As far as I know, Babut Shauna spent most of that Sunday in bed. The weather was gorgeous, so Robbie and I took my car and went on a little expedition to admire the beautiful fall leaves on the trees around the area. We stopped for Sunday lunch at a lovely country inn and ended up returning home late that evening. Robbie collected some fallen leaves to show to his mother, who was sitting in the living room, dressed in sweatpants and a shapeless pullover. I made dinner while Robbie chatted with Shauna, struggling to hold his end of the conversation as he enthusiastically explained to her how tree leaves change color after summer ends. I was very proud that he remembered everything he learned from me, even that in some other countries, people call autumn autumn, because the leaves fall from the trees, covering the soil. Later that evening, after Robbie had gone to bed, Shauna and I had an adult conversation, although it sounded more like her laying out her vision for the future. She vomited for the first time earlier in the week and went to see her local doctor. They carried out an examination which confirmed that she was in the early stages of pregnancy, possibly between 6 and 8 weeks. She didn't tell Callum he was going to be a father because he had already decided to accept an offer to go to Edinburgh University and was leaving the Valley next week. "And now you expect me to just forget all this?" I asked. "You knew it was only a temporary arrangement, Rob," she said. "Now that Callum has decided to leave the Valley and go to Edinburgh, it's all over." "I don't know how you thought we could go back to the way we were," I replied. "Even without the weeks and months you spent having sex with Callum and the baby in your belly." "I ask you to forgive and forget what happened," she begged. "You are a wonderful husband and father, Rob. A child needs a loving family, and I hope you understand that." "Well, that's not entirely true," I replied. "I think that you and Callum should take responsibility for the consequences of your actions. Please don't expect me to share this burden." "But this child will not be a burden to us," she said. "It will be good for Robbie to have a little brother or sister, and another child will not add much to our expenses." "I don't think you understand," I told her. "I'm not interested in reconciling with you, and I'm not going to take on parental responsibility for your bastard." She looked stunned and then burst into tears. "How can you be so cruel?" she exclaimed, running out of the room. A few days later, while I was on the road, Shauna got serviced. The divorce filing detailed when and where her infidelity with Callum McDarrell occurred and stated that she was carrying his child. Even if she had been living in dreamland for a while, I expected Shauna to now understand that she would have to deal with the consequences of her actions. After receiving the papers, Shauna called me, upset and not understanding anything. The gist of her words was, "How can I be so cruel?" To which I replied, "Weren't you cruel to me?" I didn't go back to Lochmandy that weekend because there was no way I was going to live in the same house as Shauna and give anyone reason to think the marriage wasn't irretrievably broken. The choice was difficult, but I figured that I would soon be able to visit Robbie for a few hours every weekend, even if it meant traveling back and forth from Inverness each time. The same day Shauna was served, I called Heather McDarrell and told her that Shauna and I were getting a divorce, and I was ending our friendship with benefits relationship. I enjoyed sex with Heather, but I didn't want any complications from continuing a relationship with her, especially if her boyfriend Donnie was serious about his intentions. Over the next few months, many people tried to intervene, including Lady Fiona, who accused me of breaking the deal she was sure we had made. I pointed out that I never said I wouldn't divorce Shauna. As far as I knew, Heather offered herself unconditionally simply because she liked me. I thought it unlikely that Lady Fiona would allow information about her daughter's affair with me to be used in a divorce case. I knew from a previous conversation with the solicitor that in Scotland you can get a divorce if you have been separated and separated from your spouse for 2 years, even if your spouse does not agree. I could have gone that route, but I decided to plead adultery. And not just because I could name Callum McDarrell. I wasn't cruel just on a whim. Sure, I got some satisfaction from naming him and shaming him, but most importantly, I didn't want to end up with parental responsibility on the grounds that I was married to Sean when the baby was born. Let Callum and Shona bear that responsibility, and let the child support agency make sure that Callum pays for his child's upbringing. I needed to get a divorce as soon as possible if I wanted to avoid this trouble. Family law lawyers are no less greedy than other lawyers, but I made a generous offer to allow Shona to keep the cottage in Lochmandy and agreed to maintain a schedule of monthly child support payments until Robbie turned 18. Both lawyers tried to stall for time and get more money out of us, so it took a few more months, but eventually Shauna admitted that it was over between us. It appears she has reached a financial agreement with Callum and his family. Her pregnancy proceeded without problems, and at the end of April, a couple of weeks after the date of our official divorce, she gave birth to a girl. I rented a small flat in Inverness full-time and went to Lochmandy every other Saturday to spend the day with Robbie. I wasn't interested in hearing about what was going on in Shauna's life, but Robbie was happy to have a little sister, and Shauna and I tried very hard to make sure he was a caring and loving big brother. I made it clear to Shauna that when I came to visit Robbie, I would not be participating in any family activities. She tried to ambush me a couple of times, but eventually gave up, and from then on, Robbie was ready for me. So I didn't have to spend any more time with Shauna and her baby than was absolutely necessary. I wasn't rude, but she soon realized that our conversation would never go beyond discussing the weather or how Robbie was doing at school. Life went on, and I began to get used to a different pattern of social activity. I had a lot more time for myself, including some amorous encounters, but I wasn't looking for a long-term relationship. Oddly enough, this seemed to work to my advantage with quite a few women, but I tried to avoid the so-called cyclists who were willing to ride with anyone who showed interest. Time passed, and a few years later, I read in the local newspaper that Callum McDarrell had become engaged to a young woman he had met while both were studying at Edinburgh University. She came from a social background, her family were from the nobility, and lived in a large old mansion on their country estate somewhere in Sussex or Surrey. The newspapers thought she was quite attractive, and the article talked about a Beauty and the Beast romance in which a wild Scottish Highlander is tamed by an aristocratic English beauty. I decided to visit her in Edinburgh before she decided to take this step. It was not difficult to track her down, and she was so curious about the purpose of my visit that she agreed to meet me in a safe environment. We met in one of those wonderful old Edinburgh pubs where you can hear the buzz of conversation all around, and where it is difficult to make out what others are saying unless you are sitting close enough to them. I recognized her from a photo in the newspaper, and soon we were sitting in a small cozy booth with a couple of drinks. "What does all this mean, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, not knowing that I used a pseudonym. "Sorry for my spy passions, but I have information about Callum McDarrell that I would like to tell you," I said. "No worries. Everything is not so scary, and you can check and see for yourself what I am about to tell you." "Go on," she said. "I'm listening, but I hope this is not some kind of scam." "Not at all," I replied. "Let me ask, how well do you get along with Callum's daughter?" She looked puzzled. "What are you speaking about?" "Didn't he tell you about his daughter?" I asked. "No." "Well, I guess you'll meet her in due time. She lives in Lochmandy with her mother." "It's very difficult for me to believe this. Are you sure he has a daughter? He never talked about having a daughter from a previous relationship. We visited his parents in Lochmandy several times, and neither he nor they ever mentioned his daughter." "Callum's daughter lives with her mother and older half-brother about half a mile from Callum's parents' house," I answered. "Her name is Flora. She just turned 5 years old, and she will go to school in the fall. By all accounts, she is a lovely girl, and I am sure you will get along well with her, even if paying her expenses for the next 20 years will put a slight strain on your finances." She looked at me coldly. "Do you have evidence that your words are true?" I handed her a copy of the divorce decree, which mentioned Shauna's infidelity with Callum. "You can easily have someone check the additional evidence," I said. It took her a while to read the basic details, but she was clearly unhappy. "I can't believe he didn't tell me about this," she said. "We were supposed to get married, and now you say that he has a daughter from a previous relationship with a single mother who lives practically on his doorstep." "Look, I'm sorry if this is news to you," I said. This information is practically public, so I'm sure you could have found out about it without my intervention. For all I know, he was probably going to tell you about this before your wedding. Whatever you do, please don't tell him how you found out. But it's better if you find out sooner rather than later. After all, if you marry Callum, you share his obligations and responsibilities. I'll have to think about it, Mr. Johnson, she replied, but thank you for bringing it to my attention. Can I keep this? She asked, holding a copy of the divorce certificate in her hands. Of course, I answered her. With my pleasure. She stood up to leave, and I felt great satisfaction when she walked out of the busy pub. I'll never see her again. And if things turn out the way I expect, Callum McDarrell won't see her again either. About a month later, while picking up Robbie, I happened to mention to Shona that I had read in the newspaper that Callum McDarrell was getting married. Yes, he should have, she said, looking at me suspiciously. But someone told his fiancée about Flora and she canceled everything. I hope it wasn't you, Rob? I answered. Why would I do something like that? Later that year, I had another interesting conversation with a stranger in a pub. One of my colleagues heard me talk about the stunning views from Mount Lochmandy and insisted on introducing me to his uncle, who claimed to have walked the hills in the area a lot in his youth. It turned out that this charming old man was a good friend of John McKee, the man whom Shauna called her father, and who died in that terrible car accident before Shauna was born. He was shocked to learn that I was married to Sean and asked why we got divorced. I told him the short version, that she had an affair and got pregnant by another man. Well, he said, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Rob. What do you have in mind? Did you know that John McKee was not Shauna's biological father? I asked. Yes, he nodded. And, unfortunately, so did John McKee. Otherwise, he might still be alive. I thought he died in a car accident, I replied, wondering what he meant. That's what the insurance company decided, he said, but the truth is a little different. After listening to your story, I think I can trust you not to tell anyone what I'm about to tell. John came to see me because he had just found out that his wife was having an affair. I tried to console him, but he was completely devastated. I didn't tell anyone what he told me, and his wife never found out that he found out everything. Because that day on the way home, John drove his car into a cliff. I decided not to say anything, but I keep asking myself if I could have done more to help him. But I think he just couldn't live with what she did. The old man paused briefly, no doubt remembering his friend, John McKee, and then looked me straight in the eye and added, I'm so glad you're not like poor John. I put a lot of effort into my job for a while, and ended up leading the Scottish Highlands infrastructure team at a multinational telecommunications company. This job gave me great pleasure, although at that time I was not the happiest person. Things started to get better, but I think the healing process started when I met Ursula. She's not a stupid German woman from Hamburg who divorced her husband because he had sex with his personal assistant and decided she wanted to get away from it all and live in the Scottish Highlands. She loves hill walks. Her outlook on life is very similar to my own, and she doesn't suffer fools. Honestly, I think she can be a little scary sometimes, but everyone else thinks she's pretty. We've been living together for 3 years now, but I don't know if we'll end up getting married. We're both a little cautious about how we frame our relationship, but who knows what could happen. Robbie turned 18 last month and will be coming to Inverness to go to university next year. In the meantime, he spends most of his free time having sex with Heather McDarrell at Shona's house in Lochmandy. Robbie asked to give him Heather, and she was hardly able to refuse him this request. She is a future chief, after all, and seems determined to continue the tradition of giving, no matter the consequences. I see Robbie at least once a week when he comes to visit us in Inverness. I spent a lot of time teaching him about giving over the past year. Now he knows exactly why I divorced his mother and why I want nothing to do with her or his half-sister Flora. It was not easy for him to come to terms with the behavior of his mother and her accomplices, but he did not fail to take advantage of the opportunity and had sex with Heather for most of the year. Of course, Robbie chose Heather for a reason. She got this job based on my recommendation. I don't know if she realizes that she had to choose whether to commit adultery or not because of me. On a less serious note, I find it funny that she will teach him much of what I taught her. Robbie thinks she's a slut for breaking her vows and betraying her husband. But he agrees with me that she's good fun and great sex, and he's going to make the most of it. Heather's husband, Donnie, runs a pet food supply company with a warehouse in the Inverness area. Donnie and Heather have a home in Lochmandy, but spend a lot of time traveling to see their clients and suppliers. They have been married for 10 years and have a lovely 6-year-old daughter who spends a lot of time with her grandmother, Lady Fiona. I don't think Donnie knows about the gift, and I'm not going to tell him that Robbie raped his wife. Well, at least not now. I'll wait until Robbie gets tired of her, and then we'll see what happens when Donnie finds out. Behind his warm and friendly facade lies a hard-hearted businessman. It's unlikely that Donnie is one of a series of cuckolds. I don't think he'll blame Robbie, but if I were betting, I'd bet on some serious bitch burning. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.